Recording in progress. Okay. So today we're going to start with aphorism 2 or section 2. We'll call them section 2, I guess. The intellectual conscience. And this is a really fascinating one for me because there's a couple of things that I'm really not sure what he means. And I think this is the one without. No, it's the next one. That's the next one, I think. Oh no, it's this is where he introduces this notion about higher human beings and the lower human beings. And I haven't got any clear thoughts on what that means. Because he says he identifies, well, I guess in the next one, it's noble and common. So what do you think about what he's saying here? That the desire for certainty yes, the desire for certainty is necessary for the higher human being. What did anybody want to sort of take a shot at what he means by that? Well, I guess not. Well, okay then. Moving on. Maybe we'll get through all 15 today.
Can I try to answer that?
Yeah, well, yeah, the way this normally works is put your virtual hand up.
I thought I did.
No, you didn't.
I did.
And Quan beat you to it. So there you are. Now you're in. But Quan's first. Quan.
Okay. So I would say that if you remember last time I was talking that the overall subject was being and becoming. And I would say that this second section is very interesting because precisely, and I want to read first, when he does not consider the desire for certainty to be his inmost craving and deepest need, as that which separates the higher human beings from the lower. I think that precisely one of the highest virtue, if I may use the word virtue in our human species, is precisely that desire for truth, that restlessness in our soul to go to that truth. And what he blamed that to the great majority, and I read again, I mean, to the great majority, it is not contemptible, okay? It is not contemptible to believe this or that and to live accordingly without first becoming aware of the final and most certain reason, pro and con, and without even troubling themselves about such reasons afterwards. The most gifted man and the noblest women still belong to this great majority. But what are good-heartedness, refinement, and genius to me when the person possessing these virtues tolerates slack feelings in his believing and judging, and when he does not consider the desire for certainty to be his inmost craving and deepest need as that which separates the higher human beings from the lower. So I think that second section is about that desire for truth in the noblest human beings precisely, and that he's very disappointed that well, according to him, that most of us don't show an enthusiasm for that what I call epistemological journey.
Yeah, but you know what he's saying, the ending of this, I think is really a beautifully little piece of work and says a lot about Nietzsche just as a human being, not a philosopher necessarily, which is some folly. The very last sentence keeps persuading me that every human being has this feeling simply because he is human. This is my injustice. And so it's sort of like Nietzsche approaches everybody as if in the beginning they share this desire for certainty.
Absolutely.
And James, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with what last speaker was it Juan was saying about the desire for truth, and he's separating the majority of the people. Most of the people do not are not concerned with the with the deeper truth and the desire to knowledge and understanding, because they are content with believing. So there's a difference between believing and using your reason to search for the deeper truth. This kind of search for a desire for certainty, and that's how he distinguishes the people with this intellectual conscience from the majority of the people, and that he says that even the pious people have this hatred of reason because they're content with just believing. But deep down, he's saying that it's just like you just pointed out at the end of this aphorism, that people are have this deep feeling, but they ignore it. They ignore this deep feeling for truth and knowledge because they're too content with just belief. So he has this kind of talking about the people who belong to the herd and just going along with the herd and believing in whatever are the conditions of the herd, as opposed to the individual who is separate from the herd and is concerned with truth and certainty.
Okay, I'm not sure where the herd came from, but that's all right. Mark.
Well, the majority, when he says the majority, I think that's what he's referring to, the herd.
Yeah, we're not,
The great majority.
yeah. Okay, Jason, you want to kind of examine Zoom user and see who that is? Yeah, thanks. Mark, I called him Mark, right? Right, Mark.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you, Quan, for reading the text. I didn't get a chance to look at it before. I've read this book before, but it's been a number of years. And I thought that this was pretty interesting too, and pretty typical of Nietzsche. I share a lot of similar sentiments about like being disappointed with other people. But I also think that this way of thinking is a little bit myopic and alienated. Like, not everybody has the educational, financial resources to spend their time like reading ancient philosophers or participating in groups like this one that we're in. And not everybody like has the intellectual capability. Like, people focus on what they're good at, right? I mean, there's people like skydiving right now thinking about losers like us. Why don't people like face their fears and like live the real life, and et cetera, et cetera. So Nietzsche is quite an intellectual and he's quite good at it. So it makes sense that he would exalt what he's good at because it puts him in the center. And there's a quote of his which I really like. I'm not sure from which book it is, but it's something like, from I realized that every philosophy was the self-confession of the philosopher, or that every way of thinking about philosophy was the philosopher actually talking about himself. And I find that I found that quote really, really insightful. So although I kind of share this sentiment of Nietzsche's a little bit, I also see it as a sense of my own, as a manifestation of my own alienation from other people. So in my more contented, less alienated self, I don't think of it as superior and inferior. People that are skydiving right now, they're having fun too. So that's it. Thanks.
Okay, Luke.
Hi. So it does not appear to be clear to me that what Nietzsche is saying here is that the higher person desires certainty. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense in the context of a lot of Nietzsche's work. But if you read the passage, and I have the Kaufman translation,
Good.
The desire for certainty as his inmost craving, his referring to the hypothetical person who has a good-heartedness, refinement, or genius, but who also tolerates slack feeling in his faith and judgment, which seems to imply that his faiths and judgments are not based on a conviction of this or that particular manner, but in fact a psychological defect in his need for certainty in the world. So it actually seems like it's the opposite when he makes this distinction between the higher human being and the lower human being, where it's in fact the lower human being that has this desire for certainty.
Well, that's interesting. Would you explain to me how you get that part? Because I don't think that's the way I read this at all. The thing that separates the higher human being from the lower is the desire for a certainty.
Well, I think Nietzsche would believe, in his own measure, that there is no certainty in the world, and any human being which has a pathological desire for certainty, because it's clear in this passage, when he says innermost craving, it is something pathological, and this pathological need for certainty is a maladaptation to the world. Whereas a higher being, a free spirit, or an Übermensch clearly would not have this.
But we're not to the Übermensch. This is 1882. We're with the gay science. We're not with anything else he's written. So we're just.
But, I mean, their higher being and free spirit and Übermensch would all be in a similar kind of conceptual boundary. And I'm trying, and I think my kind of argument here is because Nietzsche's writing can at some points be very fragmented, and the only way of really understanding a single fragment is to relate it back to past and future documents. And I think just for the argument's sake, if you take it that the highest most being, which would be the Übermensch, that the desire for certainty would be, in that context, a maladaptation, I think logically we can infer that he does not think the desire for certainty is a defining characteristic of a higher being.
But that he says that is a characteristic. He says it. So I don't know why you're okay, Audrey. You're
Where exactly
shaking.
did he say it?
Totally agree with Luke. Exactly how
Let me read that whole sentence at the end.
I'm going to read the section that makes me believe that. Just in this section, it has
Okay, go ahead, Audrey. Oh, and Luke, though, look,
it's
the people that we're wait a minute, Audrey, wait a minute. The way I want to approach this book is that we're reading it in its first interpretation. The Übermensch is a year or two away from this when it was first published. So he's not thinking of the Übermensch when he writes this, because he hasn't come to that point yet. So that's why I don't want to go there.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, okay.
But he does talk about free spirits, does he not, before this and in this book?
Well, somewhere, but we're not there yet. Okay. We're not there. Audrey.
Yeah, well, I think what you're saying is interesting, Lindsay, but I see it in this paragraph. No matter what he might not use the term overman, but this is a very interesting little section. In other words, that he's saying in the same section that we've been reading, to the great majority, it is not contemptible to believe, and we just read all that. And then he goes on to say after the next colon, the most gifted men and the noblest women still belong to this great majority. But what are the good-heartedness, refinement, and genius to me, meaning Nietzsche, myself, when the person possessing these virtues tolerates slack feelings in his believing and judging, and when he does not consider the desire for certain to be his innermost craving and his deepest need, and that which separates the higher human beings from the lower. And I think what he's saying in that sentence is that they use their reason somehow about this, that this gifted person has said, all right, I can take this, I can tolerate this, but down deep, I don't need to know the certainty, but I'm using my reason to make those judgments. So it's a pro and a con. He says pro and con more than once in this section. So it's not a particular certainty. It's certainly not ultimate truth. So anyway, I agree with this is maybe the beginnings of how the trajectory of his, final works. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, okay, I'm not, well, maybe I just better leave this then, because I take it completely differently than you do. I think that sentence, but what is good-heartedness, that whole thing. But what is good-heartedness, refinement, or genius to me when the person who has these virtues does not account the desire for certainty as his inmost craving and deepest distress, as that which separates the higher human being from the lower?
I think the key term there is deepest distress.
Well, okay, develop that for me. But first, Jason.
The desire for certainty is
Wait.
distress.
Put your hand up. Get back.
Yeah, let's follow the rule. Raise the hand, and then as a co-host, I'd like to say, I think this reading is kind of forensic reading. So we try to go through Nietzsche's experience, so we don't bring the Ubermensch, back. But I think that's the way Lindsay want to do, and that probably bring different interest for everybody. But anyway, back to the subject. I agree with Luke and Audrey. I feel when he talked about the desire, the desire for certainty to be his innermost craving and the deepest need, I think he disapproved this. Okay, he thinks that's the lower human being. But if you ask me what's the evidence, I can't. Okay, I just feel this way. But I do have a doubt. That's why before I'm thinking I want to ask the question. But before I ask the question, I already see we have two different opinions. So, anyway, probably we should agree on our disagreement and then move on.
I don't want to agree to disagree. Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. I thought Luke made a really interesting point, and I thought he made a very well structured, logical argument for his point. But I'm also a little bit dubious about it because he didn't refer to this text here. He referred to other writings. And I think that helps put this text into context, understanding other writings. And I agree with what Luke said about how a lot of Nietzsche's writing is pretty fragmentary. And a lot of times I'd say it's even self-contradictory, especially some of the later stuff like Beyond Good and Evil. But I want to warn about something so there's one thing, is Nietzsche is not like his thinking is, and this is comes off the point that Jason just made, his thinking is in evolution, right? So it could be true that the case that Luke is making is something that he agrees with at some point, but that might not be at this point. And I felt like Lindsay did a good job supporting the contrary argument by reading just from the text here and putting that forward. But one other thing I want to say is that just in general, when interpreting philosophers, a lot of times I kind of detect, and I see this a lot with people reading Dao De Jing or people reading Marxism or Hegel, things that have really influenced people and they feel really strongly, they have a really strong affinity to. Sometimes there's almost a hermeneutical attitude towards the text, where because a person has identified so much with the text, they kind of conflate their own beliefs with the beliefs of the person that they're reading. And so it can be easy to project one's own logic into the text that one is reading and not make the distinction. And we're not Nietzsche, so none of us thinks exactly like Nietzsche. So I think it's important to have a little bit of distance from the text and not conflate like the way that we reason with the way that the author. That's all I have to say.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. I still think that the text is explicit. That last sentence is explicit. There is no, what I want to know is how that last sentence can be interpreted to mean the desire for certainty is a characteristic of the lower human beings. James.
Yeah, I agree with that. That the in the first sentence in this aphorism, he already talks about establishes the argument that it is an argument against the great majority who lack the intellectual conscience. What does intellectual conscience mean? It means that a concern with what is the truth, with knowledge of understanding what is the ultimate truth, and a search for what is certain, as opposed to just believing like the majority of the people that he's criticizing. He says that to the great majority who are, he says it is not contemptible to believe. Okay, in other words, it's okay to believe whatever is in the air. Okay, and first, without first becoming aware of the final, most certain reasons for pro and con. In other words, for them, it doesn't matter whether it's what the consequences of believing this or that is. They just go along with the crowd, with whatever is in the air, with what other people believe, right? Even the most gifted men and noblest women just go along with the majority, right? With the great majority. But for ones who have an intellectual conscience, right? That's not satisfying for them. That's not enough. So they have the desire for certainty.
Yeah.
This craving for the deepest need, right? The craving is the deepest need. And he says that that's endemic to all people, but the majority of them, they're not aware of themselves to be able to manifest that, to live according to that deepest need. And they just go along with whatever the majority believes in.
Yeah, as the lower human beings.
Right.
Quan.
So, right.
Quan.
Okay, I think that the text is very clear, and I would like to read the 5 lines that I think is expressing with pristine clarity Nietzsche position. Okay, and for those who don't speak Latin, rerum concordia discord means the harmony of everything. We can replace rerum concordia discord by the universe. So I am reading the 5 lines. But to stand in the midst of this rerum concordia discords and the whole marvelous uncertainty and ambiguity of existence, without questioning, without trembling with the craving and rapture of questioning, without at least hating the person who questions, perhaps even being faintly amused by him. That is what I feel to be contemptible, and that is the feeling I look for first in anyone. Okay, so Nietzsche is expressing with pristine clarity that what he feels to be contemptible is precisely to stay in this universe of marvelous uncertainty and ambiguity of existence without questioning, without trembling with the craving and rapture of questioning, that intellectual conscience precisely.
Yeah, that's a good interpretation of that. I think I agree with you completely, but there's something really gentle and affectionate in the way he's expressing this. And he's saying he really expects people to be able to have this, but he's discovered that they don't. And so that sort of backs up my thing about certainty. Okay, Luke, go ahead. Luke,
So I
go ahead.
think it's I think reading intellectual consciousness as being concerned with certainty. I mean, so we can look at just Nietzsche passage by passage, fragment by fragment. But I think it is rather clear to me from my reading of Nietzsche that intellectual consciousness and the way he means it is more so about questioning. It's more so, it's in a lot of ways completely opposite of searching for certainties, because certainties mean an end to something. Certainties mean finality. And finality is something that the vast majority of philosophers seek. They do seek certainty, but the true philosophers, what Nietzsche would consider probably himself, are not so much concerned with certainty as they are concerned with the future. But that's going into other parts of Nietzsche, so I won't go there. So I just want to look just specifically at the text, because I just think this is, our disagreement just has to do with what this text means, right? So if we work backwards, right, he says, as that which separates the higher human beings from the lower, right? And so obviously we are inclined to believe that it is this desire and distress, the desire and distress for certainty, which is the separating factor. But upon my reading, it might in fact be the fact that he does not account for the desire for certainty as his distressing impulse, which truly separates him from the higher and the lower. Because I think the common person, the lower person, as is referred to in this passage, they choose their beliefs and their stances because they are searching for certainty. They do not choose their beliefs because of a genuine stance they have. They choose their beliefs because they want certainty in the world, because they want something in the world they can hold on to. And their inability to account for this, their inability to recognize this within themselves, is what actually distinguishes them as lower as opposed to this higher human being. And I think that is, I know it's a confusing passage.
It's really not.
Okay, we can agree to disagree.
Okay, maybe we better do that. My feeling is there's no way to take that last sentence of the first paragraph and interpret it the way you are interpreting it. The words speak for themselves, and it's very straightforward that the desire for certainty is distinguished as that which separates the higher human beings from the lower. Maybe there's some other way to look at that and think that he's saying the lower human beings have the desire for certainty. One of the things I would argue with you is that people who make decisions, who choose religions, who choose moral systems, they have stopped looking for certainty because they think they've already found it. So the higher human being keeps looking for certainty and probably never actually finds it. But the intellectual conscience is the desire to keep looking for certainty. If you stop at your religious faith or you stop at your moral system, you have stopped. You've decided you've already reached certainty when he thinks you have not. Jason.
Yeah, I agree with you. If we analyze the text, okay, especially the one Kwang just read, right? It's very clear, okay, without certainty and ambiguity of existence, without questioning, okay? So, but he put the italic in without questioning. So the way I read it is we should be uncertainty and ambiguity with questioning. With questioning doesn't mean we are certain. That means we pursue the uncertainty with question. So that's the way I read it. Okay. So, and that's the reason they put it italic on the without question. That's how I read it.
All right, Mark.
Yeah, I think that I see strong logic in what Luke is saying, although I also tend to agree that at least in this text, that's not what he's saying. But I think part of the issue here is Luke is perceiving the lower people in a deeper way than Nietzsche is. Because the way this text reads, Nietzsche is saying that people are not searching because they don't have a desire to search. And Luke is saying they're not searching, or they don't have a desire for certainty. That's my prima facie analysis of this text, in agreement with Lindsay and Jason. And as far as my understanding is, what Luke is saying is they're not searching because they're already certain. So they have that desire for certainty, and that desire for certainty just makes them decide, okay, this is it. This is my hill. I'm going to stand on it. Whereas my impression of Nietzsche's impression is that they just don't care. Whereas Luke's impression is, no, they care so much that they're willing to overlook the reality that's right in front of themselves and pretend they know things that they don't. So it's kind of I think it's a different way of looking at somebody who's not interested. Are they not interested because they've already decided that they know, or are they not interested because they don't have that desire for certainty? So there's two different ways of seeing what this desire for certainty leads to. Does it just lead to me telling myself I know, or does it lead to me telling myself I don't know? And I think that my impression is that at least Nietzsche, when he's writing this text, he's in a different frame of mind about what that means than Luke's reasoning, which I actually think is a little bit deeper than Nietzsche's, and it's a little bit more psychologically profound. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So there's a couple of more people here, and what I want to ask now is, reading this passage, what does intellectual conscience mean to Nietzsche? You know what I think it means, but if you think like Luke does, then what is an intellectual conscience? Quan.
I think that the intellectual conscience is precisely that questioning for the deep causalities, the true mechanism behind the appearances, okay? I give a very simple example. You see the sunrise and the sunset, okay? There are a lot of mythology explaining the sunsets and the sunrises, but if you have an intellectual conscience or consciousness, you will go deeper into why the sun is rising and why the sun is setting. Okay, that's the whole history of astronomy since the last 3,000 years, to take a very obvious example for everyone. And I also want to say that the argument that we all have here is the desire or the craving for certainty that can sometimes be perceived by certain person as a lack of intellectual consciousness. But I think here we have to understand the difference between the goal and the journey, okay? The goal being the certainty and the journey being the questioning, the exploration. And precisely the low, okay, it's maybe a simplistic categorization, but bear with me. I would say the lowest person is the person that would not ask any question at all. A second level would be the person who would ask some questions and would be satisfied very quick with the dogmatic answer that can be offered by religions, for example. And the noblest person would be precisely questioning first, receiving some answers from the religions or the dogmatic system, because science can be dogmatic too, but still questioning to go deeper precisely behind the mechanism that would explain the appearances, not the intellectual consciousness. I stop here.
Okay, it's not intellectual consciousness, it's an intellectual conscience. So let's get the air clear about that one. It's not a state of consciousness. It's a state of conscience. Like, that's why he says bad, they have a bad conscience. In other words, they're I can't quite get a grip on how to deal with that, but it's not consciousness, James.
Yeah, the bad conscience, bad intellectual conscience are those who have who hate the people who who have reason, who they says, I discovered in certain pious people a hatred of reason. In other words, those people who do not use reason and they just believe, right? And they're satisfied with believing. And so believing is a type of, he's contrasting those people who believe and those other people who are searching or questioning. And I think the desire for certainty is the that they have this desire because they're not certain. And the people who believe are the ones who are certain, right? And people who desire with, or their desire for certainty, but they don't have certainty, and that's why they're questioning. And that this section here about the complexity of life, the whole marvelous uncertainty and ambiguity of existence, this rem concordius discord means that in life there's all these contradictions, but they somehow harmonize, in a kind of a unity that we don't understand. But he's just saying that this desire to understand is this questioning and trying to find some certain answers, but we never. That doesn't mean that he's arrived at it. It means that we have the desire for certainty, and that's what all human beings have deep within them, but they block it out because it's easier to believe in something, some religious dogma or something. I think that's what he means by the pious people who hate reason. Yeah, so that's my thing.
Yeah, that may be, but an intellectual conscience is the urge and desire to keep asking questions, because it's expressed in the desire for certainty. That's the higher human being. And what he says in the very beginning up here is the great majority of people lack an intellectual conscience. And he's sad about that. Audrey.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I still see it as questioning is the higher person, the person that questions. I can't read it the other way, and it
That's
feels
the way to read it.
It's almost like we're all looking for some kind of. We're actually looking for this final answer, this certainty that we can't even find in this passage, and which is interesting to me because I feel it's pretty damn certain that it's questioning. I don't know, Jason, help me out here.
But the bottom line is the desire for certainty. So that's why you question. You question because you want to know the answer. And then you get an answer. And that's a lot of what these aphorisms will express. They'll express a thought, a consideration. And some of them he's going to change his mind down the road. So these are like, in a way, they're little thought experiments. I know people are putting a lot of chats in the chat. I would really appreciate it if I don't read the chats. So I have no idea what you're writing. Maybe everybody else does. It would be nice if you just get in the queue and tell us what it is you're thinking, Quan.
Yeah, I'm sorry to come back again to that, okay, because that is the nexus of our argument. I think that people have a lot of problem with the fact of the craving for certainty versus the questioning. But for me, it's the two sides of the same coin, okay? Because without the craving for certainty, you would not go into the adventure of questioning at different depth of, at different layers of depth. And it's like, forgive me, I give a very laughable example. Okay, you don't have the need to eat, for example, to survive. Well, you would not make an effort to look for food. Okay, so if I want to stretch the metaphor to the intellectual level, the goal is to get to a certainty, but it doesn't mean that we want to stay in this place called certainty. It's an event horizon, and that event horizon will stimulate us to go into that, what I call, once again, because that's one of my favorite expressions, the epistemological journey, or to speak in a less pedantic manner, the journey of questioning and questioning and questioning at different levels of depth. I stop here for now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Luke, last one. Then we're going to move to number 3. Go ahead, Luke.
My only issue is, I mean, according to y'all's reading, the only people who have a desire for certainty are the people with an intellectual consciousness, who are these higher beings.
Conscience. No, it's
I
not
said
conscience. It's conscience.
That's what I said, I think. Maybe
No.
I did. I know the difference.
Okay, good.
But I appreciate the so essentially what is being said according to y'all's reading is that not everyone has a desire for certainty, which would mean that the few people who do have a desire for certainty are in possession of this intellectual conscious. But upon my reading is that everyone has a desire for some degree of certainty, even if it's not metaphysical certainty. It's just everyday certainty, like certainty that my child will not get sick, certainty, regarding, my farm not being taken away. It's these everyday, rather quotidian certainties that we desire that manifest themselves in a desire for certainty regarding more large-scale issues, such as, political, religious beliefs, etc., etc. It's a way that everyone attempts to curb the tide of, you could say, change in time. And what actually separates the higher people is not that they don't have this desire for certainty, because it's something everyone does, but that they recognize they have this desire for certainty. And that manifests itself in a particular kind of intellectual questioning of the world, in which they are not searching. Well, some of them might be searching for, say, a categorical imperative or a solid metaphysical belief of the world, but it is a different kind of, I think, orientation, I guess you could say, to their desire for certainty that comes about through a recognition of it. That's it.
Okay. Audrey.
I think that I understood you, Luke, but I think that I don't see the questioning on one side and craving on the other. I see questioning as more it has curiosity related to it. It's not just it's not a craving that you need to know. When people question this is how I read it. And it's interesting about what Mark said earlier, that, you bring in your other learnings, your other understandings, and how you've chosen to live your life based on maybe readings of other people. And in my case, I am, I have a Deleuzian background, but I do think that Nietzsche talks about the lighter side of things is the curiosity to me. And in this thing, when he says question, he uses the word certain reasons, pro and con, which to me means you question this. Oh, this is interesting. I'll question that. It has to do with attraction towards something that interests you. It's not a craving that you have to have the actual answer. So anyway, I just wanted to say that, and then we can move on if you want.
I'm going to wrap up here, and this is how I'm reading this for the very last thing. The desire for certainty as his inmost craving and deepest distress, that which separates the higher human beings from the lower. I think that craving, that urge, that you don't stop, you keep going, and you have to keep doing it. This is Nietzsche really kind of, I think, speaking for himself. But well, the words are right there. You can shake your head, but the words I just read, they're right there. Okay. So okay, Quan, and then we're done.
I let you decide, Lindsay, and you can say no. I would be fine with that. But there is a when Goethe wrote the Faust, it's about exactly the same thing. Do you want me to take 2 minutes to explain that or no? I let you decide.
No.
Okay, that's fine with me.
Okay, good. All right. Whew. That was great. All right. I don't know where all of you are, but I know where I am. Okay. So now we're going to move on to number 3, noble and common. And I think it might be interesting to just sort of explore the if the higher human being has any connection with the noble human being. So he's characterizing the noble person as characterized by the absence of selfish intentions and gains, and how the noble person is not really respected. Oh, and compared to them, the higher type, it does identify that in the second paragraph. The higher type is more unreasonable. And then at the very end, he does the same thing he did in the second one. And he says that even though the noble person feels the way he feels, and he knows somewhere in his heart that the common people don't feel that way, he still approaches them as if they do, as if they are noble themselves. This is the eternal injustice of those who are noble. Last sentence. I think that's what he's saying here. So he's beginning to classify human beings. That's partly what seems to be going on here. Anybody want to take a shot at this one?
Yeah, I would like to say something.
Well, okay then, say something.
Okay, so I think here, precisely when he was speaking of noble and common, it is precisely about the motivation. Most people would have a certain kind of motivation and would find the noble person strange. Okay, I read it. How could one enjoy being at a disadvantage? How could one with open eyes to be disadvantaged? Some disease of reason must be linked to the noble affection. Thus they think and look disparagingly the way they disparage the pleasure that a madman derives from his fixed idea. What distinguishes the common nature is that it unflinchingly keeps sight of its advantage, and that this thought of purpose and advantage is even stronger than its strongest drives. Not to allow these drives to lead it astray to perform inexpeditious acts, that is its wisdom and self-esteem. In comparison, the higher nature is more unreasonable, for the noble, magnanimous, and self-sacrificing person does in fact succumb to his drives, and in his best moments, his reason poses. So here, we are speaking about levels of motivations, and those who are motivated by advantages cannot understand those capable precisely to put a pause to the motivation driven by the idea of advantage versus disadvantage. They are higher motivations. I stop here.
They're also unreasonable. They're higher because they're unreasonable. They're higher because they are expressions of passion. I think that's what he's saying here. How many of you want to disagree with that? Okay, James.
Yeah, maybe this is related to the last one we just talked about, where the noble person is like the person who has the this kind of ultimate concern with his quest for uncertainty, for certainty, as opposed to those who believe in the system that they're in thinking of those advantages within that system of thought, that kind of belief system, where they where they're already kind of acting according to their beliefs and so forth. Whereas the noble person is concerned with more questions about the ultimate questions about life and so forth. In that sense, they might be closer to their heart. Whereas and that may maybe explain why the noble person seems unreasonable compared to the animals who are willing to sacrifice themselves for their young, for their family and so forth. And so they're closer to the heart, their passions. And yeah, that's how I would interpret it.
Okay, so the noble person is a person who is willing to sacrifice his life to protect its young, right? Does not think of danger and death. Its reason pauses. And that's the example he's using among animals to describe something I think he's characterizing of people who are noble. They don't necessarily act according to the logical reason. I know this is going to be developed more. This isn't like the complete definition of nobility, because he's working this out. And I think we're sort of privy to this working out. The taste of the higher type, this is in the third paragraph in the middle, is for exceptions, for things that leave most people cold and seem to lack sweetness. The higher type has a singular value standard. Moreover, it usually believes that the idiosyncrasy of its taste is not a singular value standard. Rather, it posits its values and disvalues as generally valid, and thus becomes incomprehensible and impractical. So we don't really know what specifically he's talking about, but he's setting up this as a model for what distinguishes the noble person and the higher person, which may or may not be the same thing. Jason.
So back to James talking about the animal sacrifice for children. So this one definitely is not by reason. And I think Nietzsche is talking about is not sacrifice for something. I think he's talking about this drive is stronger, more powerful. So that's separate the noble and the ignoble, or higher and the lower. Am I correct? That's what I'm thinking. So I think his focus is more on the strength, higher, more powerful in this way.
I don't think he's going there. I think you would have a difficult time finding something in the text that expresses that. Because I can't find that in there. The higher type is more unreasonable. For those who are noble, magnanimous, and self-sacrificial, do succumb to their instincts. And when they are at their best, their reason pauses. I don't know if it implies power or strength or something. For me, it doesn't. James.
Yeah, it might be getting to what Nietzsche's distinguished between reason and nature, culture and nature. And so for him, the noble type is closer to his natural self, perhaps. He talks about the instincts and so forth, instincts of animals, and they're willing to be able to endure and danger and self-sacrifice for their young. And so that's kind of a natural instinct. And maybe that's what he's alluding to, that the vast majority of people are are not or have lost their touch with their natural instincts. They're too acculturated into the belief systems of their society and culture. So they're no longer acting according to themselves, their real self, as opposed to their acculturated selves. Yeah.
Yeah, common natures consider all noble, magnanimous feelings inexpedient, and therefore, first of all, incredible. This is sort of an intro in a way to I think it's the next one, number 4, where he attacks or dismisses utilitarianism. So we can move on to number 4, if everybody's okay with that. Yeah. Okie dokie. What preserves the species? And this is somebody who's bothered about his approach to good and evil is the last time when we were doing number 1. And so the very last paragraph is, nowadays there is a profoundly erroneous moral doctrine that is celebrated, especially in England. This holds that judgments of good and evil sum up experiences of what is expedient and inexpedient. One holds that what is called good preserves the species, while what is called evil harms the species. In truth, however, the evil instincts are expedient, species preserving, and indispensable to as high a degree as the good ones. Their function is merely different. James.
Yeah, what he equates with evil, what he calls the evil spirits, are those that are new ideas and new events that occur in history. And so you see that in the history of cultures where they always attack the new scientific ideas that threaten the stability of the society. And so what he calls the evil are those new ideas that threaten the fixed ideas of culture, and but it's those new ideas that really are the things that preserve the species, right? Because they bring about change that is able to be absorbed by society and to benefit society. And I think that's what he's saying here.
Yeah, I think that the notion, I thought about this a lot after our conversation last week. I think the preservation of the species has no moral value per se. And it just means preservation. It doesn't mean that there's any kind of moral valuation on the species surviving. Whatever happens, the species is still here. It may be that, like, well, I was going to say something about Napoleon, but Napoleon was probably perceived as evil by a lot of people, especially after the revolution in France. And yet he transformed Europe. Now, that's not necessarily a preserving historical event, but it could, in some cases, be interpreted that way. And I think that's sort of what he's saying. To declare that was evil, what he did, is just mischaracterizing what is really just an historical event that left the species still on the planet. And my guess would be that if somebody came along and invented a virus that would kill every human being on the planet, that would be evil, sort of, because that would not preserve the species. So that's the only thing I can think of that he might go like, well, yeah, that's not such a good thing. Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. I have 2 questions for James. Comments about new ideas being evil. The first one, I'm curious if James has read on the genealogy of morals. And then the second one is,
we're not going there. We're not going to drag in what's down the road.
okay, then ignore that question. And my second question is, what is the basis for the idea that Nietzsche associates evil with good ideas? That's it. I mean, new ideas, not good ideas, new ideas.
No, Nietzsche's not asserting that. He is
No, this
asserting,
question is for James, not for Lindsay. This question is for James.
well, James
If
doesn't
that's
have
the
his,
assertion he
Yeah,
made.
because it's right in the text right here.
Can you read it?
Go to about 10 lines. What is new, however, is under all circumstances evil, being that which wants to conquer, to overthrow the old boundary stones and pieties. And only what is old is good. In every age, the good men are those who bury the old thoughts deeply and make them bear fruit, the farmers of the spirit. Do you see that?
Okay, thanks. That was helpful.
okay, Nietzsche is not saying that what is new is evil. He's saying that that's how new things are perceived. Okay. Kwang.
Okay. The only thing I want to say is precisely, I want to read, and after I want to say what I want to say. Okay. So, what is new, however, is under all circumstances evil, being that which wants to conquer, to overthrow the own boundary stones and pieties, and only what is old is good. In every age, the good men are those who bury their own thoughts deeply and make them bear fruit, the farmers of the spirit. But that land is eventually exhausted, and the plowshare of evil must come time and again. Nowadays, there is a thoroughly erroneous moral theory which is celebrated, especially in England. Okay, so what I like here is the image that land is eventually exhausted and the plowshare of evil must come time and again. In that, what is called evil can be interesting because, as in the second line, it is said that every order society puts the passion to sleep. And if the passions are put to sleep, it might give an appearance of peace and order. But for the future, it can be very bad because when the passions are put to sleep, precisely that that passion, which is the engine for advancement, is put to sleep, and that is why the plowshare of evil must come from time to time. That's all.
Yeah, I really love the metaphor in that part of it's the thing about the garden. Dig the old thoughts, digging deep and getting them to bear fruit, the farmers of the spirit. But eventually all land is exploited and the plowshare of evil must come again and again. I just love that expression, the way he put that together. Fred.
This passage begs the question of what he means or intends by good and evil. And since we're not allowed to go anywhere else in Nietzsche or anywhere else at all but the passage, we can only guess at this point. And my guess is that what he means by good and evil here is that good, and you should probably put that in scare quotes, good is what is accepted by society. Evil is what is rejected by society. So good and evil are the poles of approbation and disapprobation among the majority of people. That would be my guess, just from the context here of what he intends by good or evil. And his assertion is that what is new is evil because it challenges what is accepted in society. Nevertheless, Nietzsche argues that that notion of what is considered evil, i.e. unacceptable by society, is exactly what goads us into making more progress to strengthen the species.
No. I don't think he's talking about strengthening the species at all. I think he's just talking about keeping the species going, preservation of the species. That's it. That's why I gave you that, what I think is the example of the virus that would kill all the people. That would be a bad thing. It may not be an evil thing, but it sure would be a bad thing because it would be the one thing that would not preserve the species. It would kill it all.
Yeah. Homeostasis. I guess the idea here is that in the common perception, what is good preserves a certain homeostasis in society. And then it's sort of conflated here towards the end with what preserves a species in the sense of some sort of homeostasis of the species in a physical sense. What is evil, harm?
I think what he's doing here is making an observation. I'm not sure if you're attributing him saying the new things are evil, because the words are there, but in the context, he's observing that what you just said, Fred, is the way things are.
Yes,
And
I think
good.
that goes without statement. When I say that he is saying, I'm not saying that he is asserting or that,
Okay.
that it is his belief. He is stating, he is saying that this is the case.
Okay, James.
Well, good and evil is a kind of a judgment, right, based on some transcendent observer, like God, making a judgment about what is good and evil. So that's why he wrote the book Beyond Good and Evil, right, to get away from that kind of form of judgment. If you go beyond the kind of judgment, then you could just say that whatever is good for the species, for the earth, is that which promotes the preservation of the species and so forth. But let's see what I was going to say there. His point is that throughout history there have been new inventions, new ideas that have been condemned by religious institutions, Galileo and so forth, and scientific breakthroughs that at first were considered beyond their beyond acceptability because they were so strange, and so they were condemned as being evil, but they're actually were necessary in order to bring about a better a way of adapting to the environment, and so it helped to preserve the species. But if you look at so maybe the example of a virus that killed destroyed it killed everybody on Earth in the world, but it preserved the Earth, perhaps, right? As all human beings disappeared, but it preserved the Earth, and maybe that might be a good thing in the long run, right? Because life will come back, because they were the ones that were destroying the Earth and polluting the air and so forth.
Okay, you went way beyond Nietzsche. It's what preserves the species. I just offered that as a possible bad thing, but so your interpretation is a pretty good one, actually, from my point of view. It would probably be better if there weren't any people ever, but that's whatever. Fred.
Yeah, James, you're right. He definitely develops in great length the notions of good and evil and valuation and transvaluation of all values. But we are supposed to take it in the context of this text, and that goes beyond this text. So here it's really just undefined what's characterized as good or evil.
Well, what I think he's doing, this is, okay, so you guys are all bringing up all the stuff that's down the road, and we're going to get there eventually. What he's doing here is setting the stage in a way, and he's observing that these words are inaccurate. If you pay attention to Kaufman's note, he mentions that this is an attack on Manichaeism, which is there's good and there's evil, and it's a constant battle between the two. And he's declaring that no, good and evil are just considerations. They're just things, and we need to get beyond good and evil. Sounds like the title of a book that might be coming down the road. I think he's just laying some groundwork here, or possibly exploring this idea, just testing this this is where good has been used and evil has been used. And in fact, in terms of the preservation, from the perspective of preservation of the species alone, there is no good and evil. Jason.
I think we are toward to the end, but I just want to ask a question. We have a disagreement because we think too much in the future. That's you think in Nietzsche's view. So we have to pretend we don't know Nietzsche. Okay, we only know Nietzsche as 28 years old guy. So
yeah, no, it's the idea in a way. I do it too, guys. You know, okay, this is my third time going through all of Nietzsche, and I know where we're going, and I've dropped little breadcrumbs here and there, like, you know, oh, and we'll get into this later down the road. But what I'm just trying to do is rope this back in, because Nietzsche's a lot of fun, and a lot of the confusion and contradiction we can explore on our own. We can see it being born in his published works and watch it grow and mature. And that's what I'm trying to do here. So the Übermensch is like the next book, actually, Zarathustra. But we're not there. This is the introduction to Zarathustra. And when we get there, then we can explore the Übermensch and hopefully remember some of this stuff, you know, even though time will pass, and I just don't know how much. Okay, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, I actually really like this methodology because, like I said, I haven't read this book in several years, but rereading it with you guys and having this discussion gives me the impression that he's not at the same place when he wrote this as where he was the later stuff that I'm more familiar with. I actually think it's not just that he's revealing his ideas, I think he's developing. So to me, these ideas seem like precursors to more sophisticated ideas later. So I do see some value in holding the later works because I think there's a temptation, you know, to look at him in this two-dimensional way as if he's just this one thinker and he didn't go through an evolution his entire life. That's not giving him a lot of credit because obviously a smart, thoughtful guy. So probably he didn't think the same thing, you know, 20 years later that he thought earlier. So so I think this is really an interesting process, and I'm getting a lot more out of this than when I read this by myself. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. No, I appreciate that. I'm getting a lot more out of it too, to be honest with you. And it just seemed like I could do this with people and just kind of explore. And that's what we've been doing from the time this first started, and grow into Nietzsche's thought and see. And hopefully we'll cover it all. And that's one of his things. And I know this comes later. You can't understand me without knowing what came before and after. And so we're going to make an effort to understand him anyway, because we're going to dissect and work on these things. Luke.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say I agree with this methodology. And some of the comments I made earlier regarding section 2, I think, I mean, y'all were right. I was thinking of a passage way later in the book where Nietzsche critiques the demand for certainty. And in that passage in section 2, he critiques the desire for certainty. A subtle difference. And I think I was putting something into that passage, reading it a certain way based off of, you know, some kind of, you know, a contextual understanding of Nietzsche that I have. Just for the sake of honesty, I just wanted to put this out there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I noticed you're reading a well-worn copy of Joyous Science. It doesn't even have covers, right? You're the one that's got like this. Have you read it like 500 times, or is it just an old copy? You're muted. You're muted. You're muted, Luke. I can't hear you. You're muted, Luke. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I've had this copy since I was like a teenager. I've read parts of it many times. I read the whole thing through fewer times, but yeah.
Nietzsche's amazing. I think he's so challenging, and there's some stuff in this that we're going to get down to down the road. that when I read it the first time, my mind just exploded with
Oh,
the
you are muted, Lindsay.
I am.
You lost your voice, so you need to probably adjust.
I did.
I can say, I can hear her.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm okay.
I hear you all right, Lindsay.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, anyway, we're gonna wrap up at this point. Nietzsche's just so amazing in so many ways, and there's a lot of ideas that you could certainly object to, and there are things. Here I go down the road that I think are absolutely shocking and beyond the pale, but we're not there yet. So we're going to wrap for today, and then we'll start with 5 and next week, and I'll try to post that right after we're done here. I'll make copies and set them up so they'll show up in your email in the next hour. Okay, if you want to come, and I hope you do, because this is a trip. But I just want to say again, the chats, if you're going to put something in the chat, say something. Just get up there and say it. It's way easier because I can't deal with moderating this and read the chats at the same time. I'm sorry, I just can't do it. I'm old. Multitasking is not my better skill. Okay? So I would really appreciate if you participate in the discussion. All right, that's it, you guys. See you next week, I hope. Okay, bye.